Hi there, and welcome to Peninsula Players Presents the History of Peninsula Players Theatre. And I'm here again with Audie. Hello, Audie.
Hi, Greg.
How are you today?
I'm doing good.
Excellent. Excellent. I have to say right at the top, I haven't said this before, but the hardest thing about these interviews is me saying Peninsula Players Presents. That's the hardest part of the whole interview. And I always pray that I get through that okay. So now, today we're going to talk about 1954, which was a pretty full year for lots of different reasons. And to set the scene, we will just talk a little bit about what was going on in films, Broadway, and novels that year.
Right. And this was the year that the Lord of the Rings cycle came out by Tolkien, and also the series Live and Let Die by the James Bond book series, and
Yeah.
also The Lord of the Flies. So it was an interesting year for novels. And some of the popular films that were out at that time were 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
Jules Verne.
Jules Verne, and then Rear Window, a nice Hitchcockian film,
Indeed.
and Dial M for Murder,
Ah,
a mystery thriller that people love.
which was
And
the play that we have done, which is great.
yes, and also The Cane Mutiny. So
Ah,
another drama type of thing. And then on Broadway, we had the debuts of musicals such as The Pajama Game and Peter Pan with Mary Martin. So some really big things happening there, as well as the Threepenny Opera.
by
So
Bertolt
some,
Brecht.
yep, so some interesting titles that people were
Indeed.
enjoying.
They later filmed that version of Peter Pan with Mary Martin and Cyril Richard. And when I was growing up in the 50s, that was one of my favorite things to watch. I love that show.
I think a lot of people did, and I think that brought a lot of people back to the theater
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's still great. So, when we last left you at the end of 1953, Peninsula Players Theatre has become incorporated, which was what they could do at the time when Carolyn and Rodian bought the property from Mom and Papa Fisher. And, and then Caroline brought up the idea of at some point aiming to have an all-weather pavilion for the theater, based on what she saw at Tanglewood in the Berkshires, where the Boston Symphony Orchestra summered. So during the winter between the 53 and 54 season, the Rathbones were back in Connecticut,
They
right?
were back in Connecticut, and Leo was, everybody else was working, so becoming a working actors. So they're all professionals in their fields, and they're out maintaining their work. So while Leo was thinking of plays to do for the season, he was also performing in St. Louis again at the Empress. And he was there with Munchow and Ken as well. So they were also doing Mr. Roberts there. And Richie is in California. He is now a Hollywood working there. And he gets tickets for the local high school play director in Sturgeon Bay, Leah Wildhagen, who's visiting during the holiday season. And she gets to go see a live performance of Jack Benny while she's over there. So
Well, lucky her.
lucky her. And in the meantime, while Caroline and the family were celebrating Christmas, they unfortunately got into an auto accident, and Caroline ended up breaking her kneecap and getting a concussion, but everybody else in the car was okay. They had slid off the road. Um, but one of the interesting things in the article that mentions her accident was the last sentence, which is the Rathbones owned the theater in the garden at Fish Creek, and Mrs. Rathbone had planned to go to Puerto Rico to organize a winter theater company. And I just went, oh, okay.
And this is the first and last we've heard of that idea. So
Exactly.
who knows what would have happened if they hadn't had an accident? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, who knows? We don't know.
Um,
And then as we get in the new year, our actor's credentials, Leo then goes on a national tour with Gene Sincere in the four poster. So there's this play going, and they're in prominent areas from everywhere from St. Louis to Kentucky to Ohio, and it's kind of exciting. It's the popular play of the season.
and also what's going on during the winter is the Dobbs Ferry Playhouse out east in New York.
Yes, and it's very interesting because Jim McKenzie is one of the executive producers. So he's co-producing event things at Dobbs Ferry. He's also at Lake George doing music carnival and producing musicals there. So it's kind of like a Door County area with vacation tourists. But at Dobbs Ferry, he pulls in Bill Munchow and Gene Bolin and Casey Bragdon, and it's almost like and Ted Bird.
Mhm.
So it's like Peninsula Players East,
And
and
yeah,
and it's very exciting, and how they've spent that time working together that winter.
Jim is not at the Players in 1954, but we're trying to keep track of him because since he started at the Players, he has become and will continue to be a huge part of the organization.
Correct. Yes. So we're
Now,
just trying to keep that linear where they're at.
now,
And
also at this time, Audie, there's a in the American theater. We just want to place Peninsula Players in context in American theater.
mhm,
And we know that around 1912, the Little Theater movement began, which
right.
grew into the regional theater movement. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. It's around 1912 when what's called the Little Theater movement is starts. And it's when a lot of silent movies and cinema are becoming more popular, and a lot of the vaudeville houses are being converted into cinemas.
Mhm.
And Broadway, or the legitimate theater in New York, is becoming more spectacle to draw people in. And there is a movement across the country called the Little Theater movement, where there are independent professional companies starting within different areas to maintain experimental theater, to maintain social issues, to maintain what they considered legitimate um, art
Mm.
and higher art. And when Peninsula Players started in 1935, it was kind of encompassed within that movement because Richard and Caroline and all of them wanted to continue that experimental art. And the works that they chose sort of reflect that,
Mhm.
doing Oedipus and original plays that Ritchie wrote. Well, now they're moving more into selecting things fresh off of Broadway and also into what is now more the regional theater movement.
Mhm.
So around this time, there are major cities such as Houston, which he'll have the Alley Theater that started in 1947. All these metropolitan areas are building up their own professional theaters for
Mhm.
themselves and their communities. And among them is Milwaukee. And there is Mary Wildrig John, who starts in the spring and summer of 1954, planning a committee, talking to the city, getting a building so that she can start a professional theater company in Milwaukee. And we're going to come back and visit that. And that becomes something as well. So right now in the state of Wisconsin, it's still the Peninsula Players as the only professional theater company.
And that's what this Milwaukee theater you mentioned becomes eventually Milwaukee Rep. And one of the reasons also we mentioned that is, as we will cover when we cover 1955, Jim McKenzie becomes involved with the beginning of that operation.
Right, correct. And so that's that movement. And so Peninsula Players is kind of shifting more into that regional theater mode, but still having a resident company. So there's still a company that puts all of these shows on and together, and they're rehearsing and building during the day and performing at night. So it still maintains that summer stock type of venue. And so some people look at Peninsula Players and also go, oh, they're a straw hat theater, which means they only perform in the summer. So there's all these other little different monikers, but little theater and regional theater, I think, is more where we fit.
All right. Well, thank you for going through that. So as the summer of 1954 approaches, some of the season preparations involve Leo Lucker.
Yes, and Leo is going to direct all of the shows for the season, and they found it very apt because Leo has not missed a season since the theater started. So this is its 20th anniversary season, and Leo's selecting all of the shows and all of the picking the actors and the performers as well. And
Caroline being busy with her family. And
Caroline's busy with her family, and Edith arrives a few weeks early. She went to the New York Flower Show, and the big hit of the flower show that year was the White Garden. So she decides that this is an anniversary year, so she's going to make all of the gardens white for the celebratory year. So that would have been a sight to see. I wish we had pictures of that, but we don't.
It sounds spectacular. And also around, as we're going into the 1954 summer, the Door County Chamber of Commerce starts promoting Door County in I think in a different way.
In a little different way. They have billboards and ads in national, the Chicago Tribune and other regional major city newspapers, as well as billboards across the interstate that says, come to the naturally air-conditioned Door County, your playground, your family playground. And the fact that it's becoming a family destination, they're really promoting it for the family. So there's more hotels in the area, there's more resorts, there's more other things for them to do. And that's going to have an effect at not just the box office, but for patrons as well, as we'll get into when some of the show selections come up. So,
yeah, and as we're going into the season, the Peninsula Players Theatre is starting to do group packages, right?
Correct. They're starting they're doing more group and more season packages. So they're really trying to get that built up to come in large groups, because that seems to be a nice trend that people are looking forward to do, is to come as an organization to an event or so forth, to make it an event for them.
So tourism in Door County is beginning to really boom.
It is, yes, it is.
And as just before the summer in May, Caroline judged the pageant.
She judged, yes, it was their Miss Universe pageant. So it was the state of Wisconsin's representative to go to the Miss Universe pageant, and it was held in the Door County area. And so she was one of the judges for that event, and I know all these community events she gets involved in. It's wonderful.
Right. And not only her, but her daughter Heloise was involved in a concert.
She was a piano recital. Her instructor in Ellison Bay was Mrs. Uno Nyman at a familiar location of Silver Poplar. So where Jim's moronic studio is now. So
I see. Okay, well, very talented family, those Rathbones.
Very much, yes.
So as we get into the beginning of the 20th anniversary season, there are 9 shows altogether, as it turns out. Yes. And the opening show is June 29th with Lo and Behold.
Yes. And I was going to say, and that wasn't scheduled to start then.
No.
No. They were advertising their season ads, and the first show was going to be My Three Angels. And they switched it up because Leo felt that this show, Lo and Behold, would have a broader cast. And because there were so many new incoming company members, it would feature them so that patrons could see the talent that they had and pique their interest. And yeah, lo and behold, looks like it's a fun show to see too.
Yes, I normally we don't like talk about what the plays are about. But this one is a interesting story in it.
It is. It features a man played by Bill Munchow who decides he wants to haunt his house after he passes. So he makes all of these arrangements before he dies to that his home is taken care of, so that he has a place to be. He dies, and when he starts to haunt his house, he realizes he's not the only ghost there, and
Oh,
he meets a frustrated composer and a Southern belle and all and a couple other characters. So it's like this little squiggling
wasn't
of
there
spirit.
something an Indian princess
An
or
Indian princess, and they all met tragic ends.
uh,
So it was why they're still there. But I just thought that I, ghosts.
interesting way to start the season? Yeah. And then July 6th, they open Claudia,
Hmm.
which featured Lanny Harper Friedman.
When she was first time at Peninsula Players, but she is a Milwaukee artist or raised in Milwaukee who became a radio star and was featured on several programs, including those created by Art Linkletter.
Mm.
So she's returned to the state, and this is her first performance in this play, Claudia. And I also want to mention this is a season where some of the playbills are missing. So in order to find this information, I've had to go to newspapers. So I'm not sure who played whom. And if anybody has anything in their drawers stashed away, that this is one year we're looking for, 1954. So
Right. And around this time, also, Caroline and Rodian's children, Dunya and Heloise, go to camp.
they go to camp. They've joined the Girl Scouts in the Fish Creek area, and they're going to Camp Joy in Hazelhurst, Wisconsin for about 8 weeks. So they're going to be off doing their Girl Scout camp.
Nice. And then we get to the third show, which opened July 13th. Here we come gathering. And that was interesting because if you correct me if I'm wrong, audiences loved See How They Run, which had been done before by Philip King.
Mm-hmm.
Were requesting
They
that.
wanted to see that again, and we often hear that. So in the box, and that too, we always ask, oh, why don't you do that one again? Or so Leo was hearing it, why don't you do that? So he chose Philip King's latest farce, which was Here We Come a Gathering, and it was I believe about a young couple who were moving into their home cottage for the first time, and the wife doesn't realize her mother-in-law is next door or very close by. So
yes, and as Audie mentioned, a lot of times audience members will ask us to repeat plays pretty soon after we've done them, and I, in general, have waited like 20 years to repeat a play, but that's in general because we've broken that rule.
Yeah.
I know.
It was 15. We waited 15.
Yeah. And then after that, On Borrowed Time opened July 20th, which was interesting for several reasons. We had a local lad in there.
We did. We had a couple. We had Eric Beckstrom, and I'm not sure if it was his brother or his cousin, William J. Beckstrom, as well. And they played youths. And Bob Thompson returned. This was his first play that he was in for this season, and he had spent part of it on vacation with his family in Colorado before joining for the season. And he was playing Gramps. And On Borrowed Time debuted on Broadway in 1938. So it's a more classical story that starred Lionel Barrymore as Gramps. And it's the story about the family tricking Death to be stuck in a tree. So it's kind of a parable fantasy story, but it's very touching as well. So we had youths in there. And then also Caroline's dog, Armand, got a starring role as well, and he played Rover.
Yes, and we have featured him before in earlier seasons. Now, a very interesting thing at this time, and I don't know if many people know this, around this time, a gift shop was opened.
Right. So the boathouse, where initially in 1937 was their performance and rehearsal space, has been converted into the Wharf gift shop. And it opens this year. And there was this lovely article in the Dark County Advocate describing the entrance to the wharf. And I just wanted to kind of read a little bit of it here. So um, as you approach to the Wharf Theater gift shop invites you to continue to the old building they use, old ropes for railings and board planks, like the gang planks used off of a ship to give one the feeling of going on shipboard. You will stop as you enter to enjoy the view of the little bay, the masses of trees on the ridge surrounding it, and the lapping of the water onto the shoe. A huge old dock pile washed by the storms onto the beach makes you wish for a moonlight night to doubly enjoy the beauty of their surroundings. A step further, and you are inside the 70-year-old building that has been lined with weathered planks from an old board, giving it the look of age. And the floorboards are spaced as the boards were, so you can see the water lapping underneath it. And it goes on, but it was just to give that feel of what it was
I think
like.
rarely has a gift shop been given such a glowing review.
Exactly. And the part that it was 70 years old, I was like, okay, is that right? Because if that is so, that meant it was built in 1880 something and would be 140 years old in 2021.
Amazing.
It is. But the gift shop inside was decorated with nets from fishermen in Bailey's Harbor and some other ropes to make it look like a wharf. And it was run by Mrs. Lucy Bellafield of Ellison Bay. And she managed the shop with the assistance of some of the other company members. And the treasures that were in there were those things that Rodian found while he was on his travels. So he
As
would
a
bring,
TWA pilot.
right. So he would come back with things from Paris or Portugal or Rome. And they also had local artisans. So it wasn't just his, the trinkets that he brought back, but they also had Leon Stathman of Fish Creek and Mrs. Aline Schutt. So there was several artisans craft works in there as well. So
And the gift shop remained open for how many seasons after that?
I believe through 57 and possibly, no, I think 57. So 55, 50, so 3 seasons it remained
Is it
open.
amazing if that building was indeed that old? As many of our audience knows, we still use that building for housing for our interns. It's still there.
Yeah, it's still there along the shore.
So then the next show opened Late Love, uh,
Mhm.
July 27th. And that included, this was the first show for June Stewart, who had an interesting background.
She did. She was had some Broadway credits, and this was her first role at Peninsula Players. And she made her Broadway debut as an actress in 1942 as this blonde starlet, I believe, at the time, at least from the black and white image that I could tell. And then June continued to work in New York, but she was also working as a stage manager. And she became involved in this production of Strange Fruit in 1945 that was directed by Jose Ferrer.
Ferrer.
Thank you. He was adapting it from a novel, and it was the story of an interracial romance. So it's 1945, and this is what's on Broadway, and it it just amazed me that that was something that they were involved in, and it shouldn't be that I'm amazed, but that was 75 years ago. And it's still things that are relevant today. So it's still that social issue
Mm-hmm.
commentary that the artists of the little theater movement wanted to
And you had
pursue.
a quote about that that I thought was interesting.
I do. The author of Strange Fruit was Lillian Smith. And when she was explaining the adaptation, this was what she said about the stage production. She expresses her belief that it can be a profound experience in human relations, as well as a successful play. We must make audiences somehow lose their racial prejudices in the darkness of the theater. It's going to be a great challenge for all of us. And I believe it still is.
Yeah, very nice. And all of that because this was June
This
Stewart's
is
show
June.
with the Players, Late Love,
Mm-hmm.
and she continued on in the rest of the season.
Right.
But the next show we get to, Mr. Roberts, which opened August 3rd, had several interesting things
It,
around
it
that.
it really did. And it was not only because it had a lot of men in it that they
Like
didn't have
19.
it in as well. And it was a contemporary piece that they had to, and not enough housing. So we've kind of talked about, everybody kind of lives on property. Well, there's a huge cast and they can't fit all those people there. So they cast some off site actors. They cast local dignitaries, including the Fish Creek postmaster, a radio broadcasting manager, and several other local youths. So Ed Allen, who was the radio producer, and a young high school recent graduate named Mike Goldman was cast as Ensign Pulver. And he had that year won his talent show at the high school for his piano recital, as well as was very active in the Footlights Drama Club in Sturgeon Bay. And there were some other local young men cast in there as well, from the Ephraim area. So,
Mhm. And
yeah.
we had one of our board members was an early friend of his who came to see
Yeah,
the show.
yeah. Bill Parsons, when we were chatting a few weeks ago, was telling me that Mike was his high school classmate. And that was one of the first times he recalls going to Peninsula Players on his own, was to go see Mike in the show along with some of his other friends. And he wasn't the only one. So a reporter had caught another audience member who said, a high school contemporary of Mike's told us, I'm going to the Peninsula Players for the first time with some of my cherry picking money just to see Mike pull the house down. And then Ed Allen had his own cheering section, and Elliot Hodgins, who was the postmaster and also a photographer, in the production as well. And this was one of the first times that they sold out and people arrived at the theater expecting to get tickets and they didn't have any seats, and they were scrambling opening night to seat people, and they had to include a piano bench. So they were putting people on everything that they possibly could find, and that run continued that way to the point where they extended for the first time in Players history. They ran a play for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And they had to cancel their mystery.
Which sounded interesting.
Which it did. In the playbill, they had I think it was called The Man, and they had told patrons it's a mystery thriller. Be prepared to scream.
Unfortunately, they didn't get that chance,
Right.
but it was also interesting to note that audience members at that time really wanted to see murder mysteries, as
Mhm.
they do today.
They do today. It's something that they would clamor for and would always request. And with that, going kind of back to Mr. Roberts, there's some large cast pictures of this production that I'm not able to identify who's who,
Mhm.
because the playbill doesn't have everybody's individual headshot in it. So if somebody out there can tell me which one is Ed Allen and which one is Elliot, that'd be great. So just freeze your screen and take a look at the faces, and you can pop me an email and let me know.
Yeah, and we'll offer some kind of prize for that. And the other interesting thing about that show was that it was fairly adult.
Yes, as and here's where we kind of mentioned the chamber promoting Dark County as a family adventure, a family playground. Well, parents were bringing their children. They bought tickets and brought their kids to see Mr. Roberts, which has some pretty salty language at the beginning. And they got up and left. And the reviewer noted that. And as much as we continue to try to describe if it has mature language or mature content, it's we that
Yeah, we
you
always
know
do our best to try to let people know what they're in for.
mhm.
They buy tickets for a show. Um,
But please
this-
ask, because that's
yeah,
the only way you're gonna know.
yeah. And this was a show, Mama Fisher, Lydia Fisher, was still running the kitchen and doing costumes. And she did a lot of the costumes for this season. But the costumes for Mr. Roberts were a different story.
They were helped to collected by Richard Stern, who probably had some of his uniforms there, as well as the U.S. Navy themselves. So Caroline was able to secure some uniforms from the Navy.
For that very large cast.
Yes.
So after Mr. Roberts runs for 2 weeks, which is the first time that happened in Players' history when they extended a play, they follow that with something very, very different, The Ladies Not for Burning by Christopher Fry, which is a comedy drama that takes place in medieval England, and it's first, and that opened August 17th.
And it's a first for the area. It's the first professional company to do that. And Bob Thompson is reprising a role that he was able to do at Rosary College. So Rosary College was one of the first theaters in the Chicago area to produce this play
And
as
Rosary
well.
College is where Bob was teaching.
Yep.
Yes. And during that run, there was one reporter who cautioned about a cold snap.
Yes, they said bring your winter flannels. And so this was around mid-August, mid to late August. And yeah, we've had those.
Indeed, we have. It's funny to think of that. And actually, The Ladies Not for Burning did very well at the end of the season. The Door County Advocate spoke highly of it.
They did. They considered it the #1 show of the season that the players did. So out of all of these the comedies, the other dramas, they felt it was well done, and it was a challenge for any performer to do, to have that classical language pace and so forth. So they rated that one as the #1 show of the season. And also among their top 3 was Mr. Roberts. So
Ladies Not for Burning is one of my personal favorites of all time. And then after that, something again completely different, Room Service,
yes,
which opened August 24th, which people may recognize that this play was made into the Marx Brothers film.
right. And they played characters. So the Marx Brothers in and of themselves, and also Lucille Ball was in that movie.
Huh.
And so they have all those comedians, and Bill Munchow getting to be one of his comedy being his strong suit was in the show, and just a hotel manager trying to maintain a group of actors from ringing up their hotel bill. So
and again, another large cast, like 14 people in that show.
It very much so, yes.
Yes. And then we moved on to My Three Angels, which is a sweet play that opened August 31st, about 3 escaped convicts around, I think around Christmas time, right?
Right. And they are trying to escape, but instead stumble upon this household. And I love showing the pictures from this production, because the sweet actress who was in it, Virginia Rossman, brought them to the theater with her once on her vacation and let me scan them. So I wouldn't have these images if she hadn't graciously given me the time to do that, or the playbill probably from that show as well. So this is one of those years where things are kind of missing.
So
But
thank you, Virginia.
yes, thank you. And it's so nice to see, because we get to see the men, the characters of the three angels. They stay and help this family. They repair their roofs. They do a variety of things for them. So
So a nice way to end the season, and that was the end of the season.
mhm.
And taken all together, the players did really well that year.
They did, and it was partially the people coming into the county and the spike in tourism, and then box office sales doing very, very well, and the popularity of the shows. So it was one of the highest grossing seasons that they had, and the most people that have ever attended Peninsula Players season was at that time, the height of 1954. But
Mhm.
amongst all of that wonderful business news that was going on, Caroline and Rodian were facing health crisis within the family. So towards the run of the My Three Angels, Heloise has returned from camp and has contracted rheumatic fever.
Heloise being their daughter.
Their daughter, and rheumatic fever throughout the entire county in Wisconsin is a childhood illness that has taken the nation, like polio had a few decades before. And so earlier that spring, a doctor from the Children's Hospital of Milwaukee had come in to speak to Door County parents as to what signs to look for, and there's other children in the county who are coming down with this. So Heloise is hospitalized at Memorial Hospital at the end of August, and Caroline and Rodian have to alter their plans. They were going to go spend the winter in Cairo, Egypt, which is just a little bit warmer than the previous winter they had on the shores of Green Bay and Door County.
Yeah.
So
And very
um,
different scenically too.
different scenically, yes, but instead what they do is eventually Heloise is transferred to the hospital in Madison. And so they rent a home in Madison for the winter so that they can stay and be near her and her health care. And eventually towards the middle of October, she's released and goes home to continue to recoup.
And so that's where we'll leave you with the end of 1954. And when we come back, we'll continue on into the mid to late 50s. So Audie, thanks once again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.